Hello and welcome to today's Heartlift with Janell. And guess who's back? One of our favorites, Dr. Alison Cook. Yes, she said yes, and she came back, and I'm so excited. Alison, welcome. We love you so much here in this community. We eat up everything you give us with a spoon.
Oh, thank you, Janelle. I love every conversation with you. You are so fun to talk to. You actually absorb and digest. And,
I do.
You really care, and it means a lot. It makes all the difference.
I really do care. I care too much. So I'm working on that. That's my growth point recently. But I really do think that you have really put your finger on the pulse of women in this book. Now, we had you a long while ago with your first book, Boundaries for the Soul. Boundaries for Your Soul. I never say it right. What is it? Boundaries for Your Soul. See? Yeah. Right. Okay. Where we talked about internal family systems. That was life-changing for me. It was just absolutely life-changing. It changed my personal growth work, my heart work, and I just started integrating it immediately into my client practice. I wanted to get certified and do all that, and I was like, can't do this. So, but thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I cannot tell you how much Boundaries for Your Soul has helped men and women in my practice really overcome trauma. And the most important part was just having the guards, the defenders inside of that internal family system relax and take a back seat. But today, drum roll, we are here with your new book, The Best of You. I love the way, I'm just going to be an author right now. I'm just going to be a writer. The branding of this, the way you've branded, it's so beautiful. I love your website. I love your Instagram. It all just makes me want to be the best of me. So well done. Well done.
Well, thank you. That's the first time I've seen the book. Actually, I have not yet seen a hard copy of it. I'm like, I think it's going to have a flap.
This is paperback because this is your advanced reader copy. So it's not hardback.
Well, thanks for letting me see it. That's exciting.
Well, it's super pretty. It even has chocolate yogurt on it because I was indulging with it. I know it's all marked up. It's just the best. It's so easy to understand. And so I think I just herald you for that, because when we are facing this humongous task of trying to find our true self, at least in my work, Alison, I think you'll probably agree, the brain is just overloaded and it hurts. Yeah. And so you have made this so easy on my brain. Like I'm getting it, which I now know everyone else will, because, it's just so good. So you start out though, I was going to catch up with you, but we're just diving right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. This is a very personal book. I felt like it was very personal. I mean, the other book, of course, you co-authored with the lovely Kimberly June Miller, but this was all you, and it got very personal right from the very beginning. I actually cried, and I don't cry very much anymore. I've actually cried several times today, so I hope I'm cried out. I don't want to cry anymore. It's just hitting me so near and dear to my heart and the hearts of many that I know need this work. You share your very personal story of standing before the mirror in your bathroom. And all of a sudden, I was telling my husband, I mean, you just couldn't move your finger. You couldn't dab the makeup on your left finger. Talk to us. What the heck? Alison.
I've never had a medical trauma. I'd never been in the hospital overnight. I'd never been, actually, I was in the ER once for a concussion years ago, but literally I've never had
Praise
anything.
Be to God.
So, right. Praise be to God, and I'm in my 40s. I'm not that old. I don't have risk factors for a stroke. I don't, they go through every time. I'm like, no. I was in the bathroom getting ready to go out on a date with my husband, and just like how you put the makeup on your index finger, and you're gonna you got to cover up those lines, and and my finger just wouldn't move.
I can't imagine.
And I kind of describe it. Probably was a few seconds, but it felt like, because it's just the weirdest feeling, and you're trying to create a category for it. Is it asleep? Is it, is it your
Am I in a dream?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, it registers and you realize, and then, I scream for my husband, and then all of a sudden I hear myself slurring.
Oh
My
no.
voice is coming out, so then, and then I'm like on the ground, and and pretty quickly my husband and I, ironically, my dad, who is age appropriate, late 70s, had had a stroke a few years ago. So
Oh,
we had a
wow.
sense of the signs.
Sure.
Um, Not that it's age appropriate, but what I mean by that is much more
No, no. Hmm.
statistically, any, so anyway, and there was no genetic factor in his, so it wasn't a genetic thing. But anyway, all that to say, yes, it was terrifying and truly a trauma. And the irony is
Yes.
of the juxtaposition of what I write about in the introduction, Janelle, is that it really is true that the day before I had written this post, and I didn't get to go into a lot of detail about this in the intro because we were trying to make it work
I
as an
know.
introduction,
Darn
but
it. We want it. We want it so bad.
I know my editor kept saying, I love my editor. She's just lovely. And she was like, there's a whole nother book here, but let's just
Hmm.
cue it up here.
Ooh, good.
But
Okay.
because there was this whole weird, bizarre train of events of like really finding my voice, really being like, I think I just landed on something. And I touch on that.
Hmm.
And it felt very significant and very weird, like something inside of me had kind of finally come to an end. And then it was within
Mm.
24 hours that that stroke happened. And so my brain kept pairing the two events. It took me months, and here it is, a book about trauma. And it took me months to be like, I would have like an anxiety response when I would go to write. Cause I'm like, did I, all the things that happen when, did I bring this on myself? Did I, and,
Oh,
and
wow.
then,
Yeah.
right. And
Hmm.
then intellectually, here I am, a therapist, I'm a psychologist, I study this stuff, I write this stuff. So I was like, I need help. So I went to a therapist to get support, and
Oh,
she was
I'm
like,
glad.
oh boy, oh boy, you're good. This is really hard. Brene Brown talks about when you're a therapist seeking therapy, you got to go to someone
It's just a
who
therapist to
get
therapist.
exactly, because you're just
It
sitting there telling them, well, I know
can
what's
call your
happening. This is
bluff.
what's happening. And she was like, no, you're going to have to feel this. You're going to have to actually
Oh,
move through
mm,
this, right? So
so
anyway,
sorry.
long story short,
I'm not sorry.
it was a it was this surreal process of having to go on my own healing journey at the very beginning of
Mm,
writing
mm.
this book.
I would suspect. Yeah, I want
Yeah.
to, I just want to dig right into there.
Yeah, yeah,
Just, you
yeah.
know, oh, can't wait for the next book then if you're going to give us more on that.
Yeah.
But you said that in that time, you've already just said it was a whole lot going on in your head, but you did hear God speak some questions, but one very big defining question.
Yeah.
And share that defining question. Yeah.
Yeah, a few months into it, I started asking God questions. I started making a list because what I noticed in that moment, it was in the moment, my husband was careening down, we were in a little town in Wyoming, careening down Main Street. And I remember in that moment being like, I don't,
Uh,
what does God promise? Like, what are my guarantees here, God?
yeah.
And
You were
here's the
thinking
thing,
that.
I get to this in chapter 3, but my husband is a widower.
Yes,
He'd already
that's
lost a
exactly right.
wife.
Yeah.
My two kids already lost a mom. So
Oh, that chills.
I'm in that car going, God, I know pain happens. I'm like, God doesn't promise. Like
Oh,
this
yeah.
man
That
has
was
already been through it. I
way
wasn't
too
even thinking about
close.
myself. I was like,
Oh,
he's already been through a tragedy. My kids, like God, I was already to the bargaining stage, of the
sure. Yes.
of the, I was like, God,
Yes.
you can't,
You can't do
um,
that.
but I
No.
know intellectually that sometimes. So anyway, I set out on
Wow.
this series of questions that I just had to reopen and re-examine from a place of having gone through this. And it was a few months in, and I found myself, my husband and I went away for a week, and I had
Mm,
I took a sabbatical from my practice. I
so glad
stopped
you did.
writing, basically just took a
Mm,
couple months, and I was physically okay, but
hmm.
um we didn't know, and we didn't know why. There was a lot
Hmm.
of, and yeah, I was out, I write about it. I was out in a hayfield, and just kind of the overwhelming question was, what is it that you want
Yeah.
from me? Because I don't know. Like, am I supposed to? And it touched on my own childhood wound of it's
Mm,
better to stay hidden.
yes.
And I get it, nothing about it, but somehow it resurrected that old childhood wound of should
What
I just
on
crawl up
earth?
in a corner and stay hidden? Because if you
Wow.
start to live, it just hurts too much.
That's so
And
powerful, Allison. I
so
just
that's
thank
where
you so much for sharing it.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, that's where that question to God was, what is it that you want from me, from this life? Genuinely.
He's asking you that.
Well, it started with me asking
You asking
God,
him. Okay.
and what I gently heard back was a
Mm,
nudge of, what do you, it brings tears to my eyes.
I
What do
know.
you want? What do
Ah,
you want with this life you still have and that you've been given? And it was just like, oh.
goodness.
And that was kind of the culmination of everything that I'd been learning the last 20 years and that ended up in this book.
Yeah. And are you in this hayfield screaming this to God? Quietly
No.
just kind of walking around. I'd love to visually, oh, because that's a defining moment. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about it. Like you're
Yeah.
there, you're like, I'm done. I know that you are a public figure and you're an author and all that, and you do, have a mission here on this planet, but I understand that conflict. That's heavy conflict. That's like, what the heck just happened in my life? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. What
Mm.
and what do you what God, it's kind of like surrender. Yeah,
Yeah.
uh, I'm and the irony of the answer was, all my life I had tried to make myself small, tried to stay hidden,
No,
tried to bury talents in the name, and that's what the whole book is about, in the
I
name of
know.
sacrificing for God. And so what the irony in God's answer was, what do you want? What do you
Ugh,
want? Right? What do you want?
I don't
I
know.
know, and it was very much like, I know you. I know
I
you.
know. I love that you said that. I know you.
Nothing
I
has
see
changed.
you.
I know
I
you.
I got you.
Yeah, you're here. So what do you want? And I don't think that's the same thing God would have said to me 20 years ago, right? This was
Mhm.
based in a relationship
That's correct. And the maturation of
of
that
have
relationship and the timing
yeah,
of, yeah, for sure. The
yeah,
timing of your work, the timing of your
yeah,
family, all of the
yeah,
the
yeah,
Kairos moments have led up
yeah,
to this Kairos moment, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you mentioned, and it's such a significant part of the opening of the book, where I always like to call them fatal footholds,
Mm,
where the enemy gets his toe in the door or his whole foot in the door in our life, in our childhood. And that's where he starts to oppress, and he looks for that. He looks for those spots, right? And if
mhm,
he can get his little toe in the door, then he's got a foothold in our life. And that happened to you sixth grade, I
mhm,
think.
mhm, 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 mhm.
Can you tell us
That was
about
the
that?
earliest memory.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
that's
many
true.
of them, and in my story, they feel so minor. As a
I
therapist, I
know.
hear just these amazing,
I know.
not amazing, but just awe, like, wow.
Yeah. How are
And
you standing? Right.
mine more fit in that category of the thousands of tiny paper cuts, right, that lead to these wounds. But there's a lot of them in this category, and this was the first one, which was just this. I couldn't. I mean, I could not see myself in comparison to other people.
Mm.
And so in that moment, as a sixth grade, it was a play in sixth grade, and I had gotten the role that I really wanted, and I had these kind of bold, brash dreams. I wanted to be the Queen of Heart. I got the
It was
role, and the
great. It was Alice
minute
in
it came,
Wonderland. It was amazing.
Alice in Wonderland, the minute it came to kind of inhabit the character, I just crumbled.
Oh,
And I looked at everybody around me. Every other girl was doing it perfectly,
that's fascinating.
and I couldn't do it. And there was no,
Mm.
I mean, and I just crumbled. And it lodged, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't, as we say with
Yeah.
trauma, whether it's a little T trauma or a big T trauma, we don't
Mhm.
when we don't get the care at the
It's
side of the wound.
unwitnessed, you say. It took my breath away when you said
Mhm.
that in the book. It's an
Unwitnessed
unwitnessed.
pain.
It took my
Yeah.
breath away. I put the book down. I looked at my husband. I was like, I think she wrote this, and this is amazing. There's no quotes around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unwitnessed pain. We had a very rich because we both come from
Yeah.
childhood traumas, and I said we had such a rich conversation about that. was very healing just in having a conversation. So thank you. And I think it's going to be that way for many, many people, that unwitnessed part, right?
Yes. And Dr. Gabor Mate in his
Mm.
film, The Wisdom of
Ooh,
Traumas, that's where I mean, he informed me so much, but because
that
this whole
movie.
thing is, the quote that he says is, children aren't traumatized because they get hurt.
Yeah,
They're traumatized because they're alone
I know. Oh
with the
God,
hurt.
I know.
Right. And that
I
was
know.
where it was like
Oh,
it's the unwitnessing. It's when someone
hmm,
comes alongside of you and names what happens and helps you create. And
yes.
then I always bring in Kurt Thompson stuff about
Oh
shame,
yeah. Hmm.
because in the absence of that, we create shame comes in.
It does
And
right away.
shame says, why bother? I'm not worthy of taking up space on this planet.
Hmm.
And those wounds fester for years.
They
And
do.
they build on
They
each
do.
other,
And
until
you
we can start to bring them into the light of healing.
And you write that you took on a bravado effect. It was like, oh, no big deal. And you diminished all of those things. But sixth grade, Allison, what the
I know.
heck? Like
Yeah.
where did that come from? And there's so much in this book. I have 5 pages of questions and notes, and we're not going to get to them. So everyone
Yeah.
has to buy this book, and we just may talk about it more and more as
Yeah.
when it comes out in September. But
Yeah.
so sixth grade, you bring into the book epigenetics, childhood trauma, and then the lineage of trauma that's passed down. We talk a lot about that here.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma is something I'm very passionate about helping
Mm-hmm.
and understanding. And this book brings so much. Oh, it's so digestible.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so
No, thank you.
digestible, the way
Thank
that
you.
you write about it, share about it, and it's going to be so helpful. So would you say that may have been something emotionally passed down in the DNA? How do we know? We don't really know these things, but sixth grade, maybe you just had a freeze moment and it stuck.
Oh, there's some legacy burdens there. Yeah, there were some
Oh,
legacy burdens there. And some family dynamics that led to this sort of cocktail that I talk about in the book, of
oh
feeling
yeah.
unseen, of not knowing how to inhabit. But that's why I call it a cocktail in the book,
Hmm.
because it's not just our childhood wounds. There's church messages, and then there's cultural conditioning, especially
Yes,
for
you have a
women, and
trifecta there. Yep.
that all kind of come together. And then I look at my life and I'm like, we look at our moms, our grandmas. I mean, when were they taught how to have a voice? They weren't.
They were
So
not.
even when they did their best, how did
Hmm.
they know how to teach? I was right in that generation where it was like we were supposed to have a voice, but our parents didn't
Yeah.
know how to teach us how to have a voice.
No.
And so I was in that
No.
weird generation, right? My parents sent me off to an Ivy League school from a tiny town,
Wow.
but it wasn't like my husband will say, well, didn't you think you would have a career? And I'm like, no, I thought I'd get married. I mean, nobody, it was still that weird generation, and that's in
Sure.
Christian culture too. So you got to bring the
Yes.
Christian overlay. Like
Oh,
it wasn't, yeah, you can be smart, but like there was no guidance,
oh,
no
none.
like,
Mm-mm.
and you know what I'm saying? It's just sort of like I knew,
Mm-mm.
so it was confusing
Mm-hmm.
because you
Or
kind of
yeah.
had some of the surface level. I know to go to school, or I can get decent grades and on the surface, but on the inside, I had no sense
Mm-mm.
of what it means to inhabit a self, a person,
Wow.
you
Wow. It's
know?
fascinating to me. It really
Yeah.
is, because you present, now today, right? Of course. So high functioning, I always say I have a specialty in high functioning anxiety. I can specialize in it myself, because it just, I mean, I can't, there's no other word, gobsmacks me. I'm going to borrow
Yeah.
from our British friends that we can be so high functioning, yet have no clue who we are. None.
None.
Not a
None.
zippo. Mm-mm. So what do we do? So I'm going to just, you had this experience in sixth grade. So where are you on your journey now? Like how, when have you developed this understanding of your true self? Let's define that first. Let's define
Mhm.
true self. I've done it a lot on here, but I love the way you say it. Oh,
I mean, I define it. It is a lofty term, right?
it
It's like
is.
defining God. God.
Woo!
How
Yeah.
let's define God, right? Like the true self, is. I just define it simply as as an awareness of your own strengths, your gifts, your talents, your limitations, your blind
Mhm.
spots. It's a humble self-awareness, and that to me in the last 2 years since the stroke has been. I write it in the last line of my acknowledgments is the biggest
Mm.
surprise of my life in the last 2 years is the a soul that is known, and by known I
Oh,
don't just mean by God, I mean by me too,
yes.
both of us. And it's knowing. And so it's not true self is not this static identity that's like, this is who I
Mhm.
am. That's a persona. That's not a true
Yes.
self. The true self is a living and breathing, it's a living and breathing soul, but it's this is kind of how I've taken myself to be, including there is a blind spots, including the growth areas, including the wounds that are still
Mhm.
healing,
Mhm.
including the but I kind of don't have secrets from myself. I don't feel like two different people.
Ooh, wow.
All through my 20s and 30s, I felt the divide. I
Yeah.
knew the
Mhm.
performer, the producer, the pleaser, the one everybody thought was
Top
so
notch,
on.
baby.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you got it. Just what you
Mhm.
said, and the inside of me that
Mhm.
was lost,
Yeah.
confused,
Yeah.
lonely. All I knew the divide. I,
Crazy.
I knew the divide, but I just thought that was
Normal.
life.
Right. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and now I would say there's no divide. It's just this like I'll look out my window and look at the mountains in the morning and just be like,
Mm.
here I am. you know and it came right
Oh.
out of that season with the stroke of just because I'd lost everything too. I'd lost all the external things during
Yeah.
that season,
Yeah.
and so it was God and me and the
And God and me.
spaciousness of and being known. And I was like,
Mm.
that peace. I talk in the a lot of the toward the end what it means to be at peace with yourself, and I think that has to
Mhm.
do with
Mhm.
understanding the truth of yourself, even the parts of your story that are still. I still
Evolving.
struggle with inner tension between, man, I've got a book coming out.
You do.
I'm promoting it,
You
I'm
are.
marketing it, and there are parts of me that are like, that's bad. And I got to do all this work to be like, negotiate. It's okay. Deep breaths. But I
Uh-huh.
know how to do the work now. I
Okay.
know how to do the work. I know how to name it. I know how to much more quickly kind of be
Mhm.
like, okay, God. And oftentimes the parts of me that are shaming me the
Mm.
most are the ones that need God's love, not,
Yes.
it there's so much there.